Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. The first stone struck Seraphina Vale across the shoulder, and she did not flinch. The second cut her lip. Blood touched her tongue, metallic and warm, as the entire Black Hollow pack stood in a half-circle beneath the torchlight of Ravenspire Ridge. The wind tore through the clearing, lifting her silver-blonde hair into her eyes, but she refused to wipe the blood away. If she did, they would call her weak. If she cried, they would say she was proving them right. Calum Thornridge stood at the center, tall, broad, his jaw tight as carved granite. He did not throw a stone. He did not need to. His silence was worse. "You brought death into our borders," he said, voice cold as winter iron. 3 hunters tracked your scent. 3 wolves are buried because of you." The words crashed harder than the stones. Seraphina felt every eye burning her skin. She wanted to scream that she had warned them. She had smelled the iron traps days ago, but warnings meant nothing when fear demanded a sacrifice. Brannock Hale shifted beside the alpha, fists clenched, eyes restless. He would not look at her. Malis Thornridge did look, wide-eyed, trembling, as if she might step forward, but she did not. No one did. Seraphina tasted ash in the air, smelled pine sap, and something darker, panic. It clung to the pack like smoke after a fire. She had always been different. Her wolf had come late. Her senses were sharper than the others. She dreamed of blood before it spilled. Eldrick Moore had once called it a gift. Tonight, they called it a curse. "You are a shadow over this pack," Calum said. "By moonrise, you will cross the Ashfall borderlands. If you return, you die." A murmur rippled through the wolves. Exile, not death. Somehow that hurt more. Death would have been quick. Exile meant living with the truth that no one wanted her. Seraphina's gaze locked with Calum's one last time. She searched for doubt, for regret. She found neither. When the torches lowered, she turned. Her boots sank into cold earth as she walked through the whispering pine forest alone. No escort, no protection. Just the howl of wind threading through trees like a warning. The forest floor crackled beneath her steps, brittle leaves snapping like bones. She did not look back. Not when a child cried her name. Not when Malis whispered, "I'm sorry." The pack's scent faded with every breath she took, but something else remained. A tightness in her chest that was not grief. It was dread. Because beneath the humiliation, beneath the sting of betrayal, she felt something worse. Silence. The hunters had not come because of her. They had come because something older had been awakened beyond Frostmere Valley. She had felt it in her bones 3 nights ago when the moon turned red at its edges. She had tried to tell them. No one listened. Now she walked into exile knowing a storm was coming, and the only wolves who could face it had just thrown away their shield. The moon rose higher, pale and watchful, as Seraphina reached the cliff edge overlooking Ashfall borderlands. Smoke coiled in the distance, too thick for cooking fires. Her wolf stirred beneath her skin, restless and uneasy. She knelt, pressing her palm to the earth. It vibrated faintly, like a heartbeat not her own. Then she smelled it. Not human, not wolf. Something scorched and ancient. Her breath caught. She turned toward Black Hollow territory. For a heartbeat, she almost ran back to warn them again. Exile be damned. But Calum's voice echoed in her mind. "If you return, you die." She rose slowly. "You made your choice," she whispered to the wind. Then the night split open with a distant, echoing howl. Not from her pack. Not from any pack she knew. It rolled across the mountains like thunder, shaking birds from trees. Seraphina's eyes widened, because she recognized that sound from her dreams. And in those dreams, Ravenspire Ridge burned. 3 weeks before the exile, Serafina Vale had stood at the edge of Frostmere Valley, watching the sunrise bleed across the snow. The sky had been soft pink and gold, the kind of morning that made everything feel possible. She remembered thinking that maybe this season would be different. Maybe the pack would finally see her as more than the strange girl whose wolf had come late and whose senses were too sharp for comfort. The air that morning carried frost and pine resin, clean and bright. But beneath it, she had caught another scent. Metal. Oil. Human sweat. It had been faint, barely there, but it curled in her lungs like smoke. She had followed it beyond the usual patrol line and found Boot. Prince pressed deep into the thawing mud. Hunters. Close. Closer than they had ever dared to come before. Her heart had pounded, not in fear for herself, but for the children racing through the valley behind her. She ran back to warn them. Calum Thornridge had been sparring with Brannock Hale when she burst into the clearing, breath sharp, boots muddy, wolves paused mid-laugh. Serafina pointed toward the valley's edge, explaining quickly, boot prints, iron traps, fresh scent. Calum listened with narrowed eyes. He did not mock her. He did not dismiss her, but doubt crept across his expression like a shadow. "You're certain?" he asked. She nodded. She could still taste the metal in her throat. Brannock volunteered to check the claim. 2 scouts went with him. They returned an hour later, shaking their heads. No prints, no traps, nothing but deer tracks and wind-swept snow. A ripple of quiet laughter passed through the younger wolves. Someone muttered, "Always seeing ghosts." Heat had flooded Serafina's face. She had wanted to drag them back to the exact spot, press their noses into the soil, but when she returned later, the prints were gone, covered, erased, or maybe moved. That was the first time doubt touched her. After that morning, eyes followed her differently. Not openly cruel, just cautious. The pack had been on edge for months. Food was scarcer. Borders were tighter. Rumors whispered of Torvek Rune and his Ashfall wolves testing alliances in the dark. Stress made everyone sharper, harder. Serafina felt it most during the full moon runs. When they shifted beneath silver light and sprinted across Ravenspire Ridge, she outran nearly all of them. Not because she tried to show off, but because something inside her pushed faster. Her wolf moved like wind cutting through trees, silent and precise. She could hear heartbeats at impossible distances. She could sense movement under frozen ground. Once she stopped mid-run and veered away. Seconds before a hidden ravine swallowed the wolves behind her. They praised her then, called it instinct, called it luck. But Eldrick Moore watched her with knowing eyes. "Power does not always look like strength," he told her quietly one evening. "Sometimes it looks like fear. Others fear what they cannot measure." The second warning came 2 nights before the hunters attacked. Serafina woke from a dream choking on smoke. In the dream, the moon had cracked like glass and fallen into the valley in shards of red light. She had seen Ravenspire Ridge burning, wolves running in chaos, and Calum's voice calling her name, not in anger, but in desperation. She ran to the watch post before dawn and told Brannock what she had seen. He looked torn. He respected her. He trusted her more than most. But dreams were not proof. "If I raise alarm again and there's nothing," he said gently, "Calum will have to respond." She knew what that meant. Authority could not look foolish. Twice. So she swallowed her urgency. She asked only for stronger patrols. They agreed. Quietly. Secretly. No announcement. No panic. That afternoon, she found Malus braiding wildflowers into her hair, humming softly. For a moment, Serafina almost believed the dread would pass. It did not pass. The hunters came at dusk, not from Frostmere Valley, but from the western cliff trail no one used anymore. 3 of them, silent, patient. They had studied the pack's movements. They carried silver-tipped rounds and iron snares dusted with wolfsbane. Serafina smelled them seconds before the first shot rang out. She tackled a young wolf to the ground as the bullet tore through a tree trunk behind him. Chaos exploded. Howls, gunfire, the sickening snap of a trap closing. She shifted mid-sprint, fur bursting through skin, bones reshaping with practiced agony. She moved like lightning, dragging one hunter into the underbrush before he could reload, but the damage had already begun. When the smoke cleared, 3 wolves lay bleeding on the earth. The hunters were dead. The pack was shaken, and as grief twisted into fury, every eye slowly turned toward the one wolf who had warned them before and been wrong. At least, that's what they believed. The funerals were held beneath a sky the color of bruised steel. Smoke from the pyres rose straight into the air, thick and silent, as if even the wind refused to disturb the dead. Seraphina stood at the back of the clearing, hands clasped tightly in front of her, nails biting into her palms. The scent of burned pine mixed with grief, sharp and choking. Mothers wept openly. Fathers stared into the flames with hollow eyes. The 3 wolves who had fallen were young, strong runners, quick learners, future protectors. Seraphina remembered sparring with one of them just days before, laughing when he slipped in the mud. Now his body was ash. Caleb spoke few words, his voice steady but stripped of warmth. "We failed to see the threat clearly," he said. But he did not look at her, not once, and when murmurs rose through the gathered pack, they did not blame the hunters. They blamed the warning that had come too early, the warning that had cried wolf, because if she had not raised alarm weeks before, perhaps this time they would have listened harder. That night, whispers spread through Ravenspire Ridge like frost creeping across glass. Wolves avoided her shadow. Paws fell silent when she passed. Brannock approached her near the waterline, his expression troubled. "You were right about them being close," he admitted quietly. "But why couldn't we find the prince before?" She had no answer that would not sound like madness, because when she returned to that same spot after the attack, she found something different. Not erased tracks, not covered ones, but claw marks, deep and jagged, pressed into stone, too large for any wolf she knew. Not human either. The marks had not been there before. She had traced them with trembling fingers, feeling heat beneath cold rock. Something had shifted between her first warning and the hunter's arrival. Something watching, something learning. She told Brannock this, but his eyes darkened with the same fear she saw in others, fear of what they could not explain. Milas found her before dawn, wrapped in a heavy cloak, cheeks pale from sleeplessness. "I don't think you're lying," she whispered. "I just think something follows you." The words were meant to comfort. They felt like a blade. Seraphina wanted to argue, but memory cut in sharp and clear. Strange dreams had followed her since childhood. Red-edged moons, fire running through trees without burning them, a voice she never saw, always distant, always calling her towards something vast and terrible. Eldrick Moore once hinted that her mother had not been fully of Black Hollow blood. But he never finished the story. She had grown up with half-answers and careful glances. Now those half-answers returned like ghosts, demanding to be heard. "If something follows me," she told Malus softly, "then it's not hunting us because of me. It's hunting all of us." But even as she said it, doubt crept in. What if her existence was the spark? 2 days later, the council gathered without inviting her. That was when she knew the decision had already been made. Wolves avoided her gaze entirely now, not cruel, just resigned. Like villagers turning away from a storm they could not stop. When Caleb finally summoned her to the clearing at dusk, the torches were already lit. Eldrick stood silent. Naira Solwyn avoided her eyes. Brannock looked torn apart from the inside. Caleb's voice was firm, alpha steady, carved from duty rather than anger. "The pack cannot survive more uncertainty," he said. "Your presence divides us." Divides us. Not endangers, not harms. Divides. The word settled heavy in her chest. She understood then. Fear had to land somewhere, and she was easier than admitting something larger prowled beyond their borders. "I never wanted to divide you," she said. voice steady despite the tremor in her bones. "I wanted to protect you." Calem's jaw tightened. "Then protect us by leaving." When the stones flew that night and exile was declared, Seraphina understood something no one else did. The pack was not choosing survival over her. They were choosing comfort over truth. Because admitting she might be right meant admitting they were facing something ancient and unstoppable. And that terrified them more than losing her. As she walked away beneath the rising moon, she did not feel hatred. She felt grief. And beneath that grief, a terrifying certainty. The claw marks she had seen in stone were fresh. The hunters had not moved alone. They had been pushed, guided, like prey herded toward a trap. And if that was true, then exile would not save Black Hollow. It would remove the only wolf who could sense what was coming. Behind her, Ravenspire Ridge glowed warm with torchlight. Ahead, Ashfall borderlands lay dark and endless. And somewhere beyond that darkness, something waited, patient, ancient, and aware that she was now alone. Ashfall borderlands did not welcome exiles. The land was cracked and gray, dust rising in thin spirals with every step Seraphina took. Dead trees leaned like broken ribs against a pale sky. The air smelled of sulfur and old storms. She shifted at the tree line, bones bending, skin rippling, fur bursting through her like a second breath. Her wolf landed silent on the stone, silver blonde coat gleaming under the thin sun. Alone she moved faster. Hunger gnawed at her belly, but something deeper gnawed at her mind. The distant howl she had heard the night of her exile echoed again, rolling across the cliffs like thunder under rock. Not Ashfall wolves, not Black Hollow, something older. She followed the sound west, paws light, ears sharp. Twice she caught the scent of Torvek. Rune's patrols, but avoided them easily. They were loud, predictable. The other scent was not. It drifted like smoke, vanishing when she tried to fix it. Watching, measuring. By nightfall, she reached a ridge overlooking Frostmere Valley from afar. The distance made Black Hollow territory look small, fragile. She lay in tall grass, chest rising slowly, listening. Wolves' howls carried faintly across the mountains. Safe, for now. But beneath their calls, she heard something else. A rhythm, like claws scraping stone in a pattern. Her fur bristled. She followed the vibration to a hollow carved deep into the cliffside. Inside, the air pulsed warm. Symbols burned faintly into rock walls, curved marks she had seen before in dreams. The same jagged claws that scarred the stone near Frostmere. She stepped closer. The markings glowed brighter at her presence, heat licking across her skin without burning. Then a voice, low, layered, not fully sound, pressed against her thoughts. Not words? Recognition. She staggered back, shifting painfully into human form, heart hammering. "What are you?" she whispered. The cave fell silent, but one symbol continued glowing, shaped like a crescent, split down the middle. Memory cracked open. Her mother's face, soft, distant, gone before Seraphina turned 8. She remembered one night when her mother had dragged her from bed to stand beneath a blood-tinted moon. "If they ever fear you," her mother had whispered, pressing her palm against Seraphina's chest, "it is because they do not understand what protects them." At the time, the words made no sense. Now they burned. She reached toward the glowing crescent. The symbol pulsed once, then dimmed, leaving a faint mark on her palm like ash. A rush of images flooded her. Wolves running through fire unharmed, hunters turning on each other in confusion, a barrier invisible but unbreakable encircling Ravenspire Ridge. And at the center of that barrier stood her, not leading, not fighting, simply existing. She gasped and fell to her knees. The hunters had tracked her scent because the force surrounding Black Hollow was tied to her blood. When she remained inside pack borders, it shielded them subtly. When she wandered too far beyond, cracks formed. The realization hit harder than exile. The 3 hunters had not come because she warned too early. They had come because she had strayed too close to the valley's edge during patrols, stretching whatever unseen barrier wrapped their territory. And when the pack forced her out entirely, that barrier would collapse. She rose slowly, breath unsteady. Anger flickered, but it was not for Calum. He could not protect against what he could not see. She stepped outside the cave and stared toward a Ravenspire ridge. Dusk painted the mountains deep purple. Smoke rose faintly in the distance again, thicker this time. Her pulse quickened. The barrier was already weakening. The ancient presence in the cave stirred faintly, almost approving, not malicious, not kind, bound to her. She understood now why Eldrick had watched her with caution, why her wolf had awakened late. She was not merely Black Hollow blood. Her mother had carried something older, tied to mountain and moon alike. Seraphina stood at the cliff edge as night swallowed the sky. She could run back and die by alpha decree, hoping her presence restored the shield in time. Or she could stay beyond the border and learn to control what she carried, because rushing in blindly might not strengthen the barrier, it might shatter it completely. A distant howl cut through the dark, not the ancient one this time. Black Hollow, panicked. Her heart clenched. Instinct screamed to sprint home, but the crescent mark on her palm pulsed faintly, warning her that power without control was destruction. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to think. If her blood created the shield, then distance was not the only factor. Intention mattered. Focus. She closed her eyes and imagined Ravenspire Ridge whole and unbroken. Imagined roots digging deep, stone uncracked, wolves safe behind unseen walls. The mark burned hotter. Wind shifted violently around her. Far away, the panicked howls softened. Not gone, but steadier. She opened her eyes, stunned, and somewhere in the darkness beyond Ashfall, something ancient smiled. Ravenspire Ridge did not burn that night, but it came close. The attack began just before dawn, when exhaustion makes even strong wolves careless. Calum Thornridge woke to the scent of smoke and iron slicing through cold air. The western watchpost had gone silent. By the time he reached the ridge edge, flames were licking the lower trees, and shapes moved beyond the tree line. Not hunters this time. Wolves, larger than Ashfall patrols. Their howls were wrong, layered with something deeper, something that vibrated through bone. Torvek Rune stood at the front, but he was not leading. His eyes were unfocused, movements stiff, as if guided by an unseen leash. Black Hollow wolves scrambled to form ranks. Brannock barked orders. Nira dragged injured scouts to safety. The ground trembled beneath pounding paws. Then, just as Torvek's wolves lunged across the borderline, something invisible slammed into them. The air rippled like heat above stone. Several attackers were thrown back violently, yelping in confusion. Calum froze. There was no visible wall, only resistance. The attackers regrouped quickly, testing the invisible barrier with snarls and claws. Each impact sent a faint shimmer across open air, like light flickering on water. Calum's mind raced. No such defense had ever existed before. He felt it in his chest, like pressure building in a storm cloud. Then he realized something colder. Seraphina was gone. She had crossed into Ashfall borderlands completely, and yet something protected them still. "Hold formation!" he roared, though uncertainty crept beneath his authority. Torvek snarled at the unseen force, fury twisting his features. Then he stepped back. His head tilted slightly, as if out listening to a command only he could hear. The deeper vibration returned, shaking tree trunks and loosening snow from branches. Black Hollow wolves flinched. Calum's gaze swept the horizon, searching for an enemy he could see. But this battle was not against claws and teeth alone. It was against something unseen and patient. Miles away on the cliff, Seraphina dropped to one knee as pain split through her skull like lightning. The crescent mark on her palm blazed white-hot. Images flooded her mind. Calum at the border, Torvek lunging, wolves slamming into invisible force. The shield held, but barely. She clenched her jaw and focused harder, picturing Ravenspire Ridge wrapped in silver light. Wind roared around her violently, whipping dust into spirals. Her wolf pushed forward, wanting to run. to fight physically, but this was not a battle of muscle. It was will. The ancient presence from the cave pressed against her consciousness again, not controlling her, amplifying her. She understood then. It was not the source of the shield. It was the conduit. Her bloodline was the key. Generations ago, her mother's ancestors had bound mountain and moon into protection for their pack, but that power had diluted over time. Only she carried it fully awakened. Back on the ridge, cracks began to appear in open air, faint silver lines spreading like fractures in glass. Brannock saw them first. "Alpha!" he shouted. Calum felt it too, the shield weakening. Torvek's wolves charged again. One slipped partially through before being hurled back, fur smoking. The deeper vibration grew louder, like something laughing beneath the earth. Calum's heart slammed against his ribs. This was not Torvek's strength. This was something using him. "Fall back to the inner circle," he commanded. Wolves retreated, dragging wounded with them. Flames licked higher along the outer trees. Then suddenly, the trembling stopped. The cracks sealed. The invisible barrier flared brighter than before, casting silver light across the valley. Torvek staggered backward, confusion snapping into his eyes as if waking from a dream. He looked around wildly, then gave the retreat call. His wolves followed, vanishing into the forest as quickly as they came. Silence fell heavy over Ravenspire Ridge. Smoke drifted upward in thin ribbons. Wolves panted, shaken but alive. Calum stared at the empty border, breath ragged. He had felt it, power surging, protecting them at the last second. Not his, not any wolf standing beside him. His thoughts returned to the exile, to the night Seraphina walked away under torchlight. Eldrick Moore approached slowly, leaning on his carved staff. "You feel it now," the elder said quietly. Calum did not answer. He did not need to, because beneath relief, beneath confusion, a terrible realization settled into his chest. The pack had survived, something they could not see, and the one wolf who might understand it was gone, cast out by his command. Far beyond Ashfall, Seraphina opened her eyes slowly, exhausted but steady, the shield held. But she knew this was only the beginning, and next time, the ancient force would not test the border gently. Seraphina did not sleep after the shield flared. She remained on the cliff edge as dawn painted the mountains in pale blue and gold. Her body trembled from the strain, veins aching as if she had run for miles. The crescent mark on her palm faded to a faint silver scar, but it still pulsed softly, like a second heartbeat. She knew now that the power protecting Black Hollow was tied directly to her focus. When fear scattered her thoughts, cracks formed. When her will sharpened, the barrier strengthened. But something else had stirred during the attack. The deeper vibration she felt through Torvek's wolves was not random. It had intention, strategy. It was testing her limits, and it knew she was alone. She rose slowly, scanning the Ashfall horizon. The land felt heavier now, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. If she remained ignorant, the next assault would break through completely. Back at Ravenspire Ridge, Calum stood before the council fire with exhaustion carved into his features. Wolves whispered in restless clusters. Some spoke of magic, others of curses. Eldrick Moore's voice cut through the tension. "This was not Torvek's war alone," the elder said quietly. "He was guided." Brannock shifted uneasily. "By what?" Eldrick's gaze turned toward the mountains beyond Ashfall. "By something older than our packs." Calum's jaw tightened. He thought of Seraphina's warnings, the erased prints, the claw marks carved in stone. He remembered how the shield flared brightest after she left. His chest felt hollow. "Prepare a scouting party," he ordered abruptly. "West of Ashfall." Murmurs rose in shock. Crossing that border meant war with Torvek's territory. "If we are being tested," Calum continued, voice hardening, "then we test back." But beneath his resolve, doubt gnawed at him, because every instinct told him they were missing a piece only one wolf carried. Seraphina moved toward the cave again by midday. The symbols were dimmer now, but still warm. She pressed her palm against the crescent carving and closed her eyes. "Show me," she whispered. The air thickened instantly. Images flooded her mind. Torvek kneeling in a clearing of blackened trees, head bowed to a towering shadow formed from smoke and bone. Not flesh, not wolf. Its eyes glowed ember red. It did not speak with words, but Torvek obeyed its will like a tethered hound. The creature fed on conflict, on fractured loyalty. Every time fear divided a pack, it grew stronger. Seraphina gasped and pulled back, breath ragged. This was no simple spirit of mountain and moon. It was something bound long ago and forgotten, and her bloodline, meant to protect, had once helped imprison it. That was why the barrier responded to her. It was not just shielding Black Hollow. It was containing something buried deep beneath Ashfall. The realization struck with brutal clarity. When she wandered too far from Ravenspire Ridge before exile, the containment weakened. The hunter slipped closer because cracks formed in the boundary, meant to hold the shadow creature beneath the mountains. It had learned to exploit her uncertainty, to push her toward the valley's edges. And when the pack cast her out entirely, it attempted to shatter the seal through Torvek's assault. Her exile was not coincidence. It was manipulation. The shadow wanted her removed from the center of Black Hollow territory. Anger surged hot and steady through her veins, not at Kolim, but at the creature that twisted fear into a weapon. She rose slowly, eyes blazing with new purpose. Running back blindly would not be enough. She needed control. She needed to strengthen the seal permanently, and that meant confronting what lay beneath Ashfall. That evening, Kalim's scouting party returned battered and shaken. They had found Torvek's wolves camped strangely silent, as if recovering from a sickness. But deeper into Ashfall, the scouts felt tremors, underfoot, and heard distant echoes that made their fur stand on end. Brannick reported claw marks scorched into stone far larger than any wolf. Kalim listened without interruption. Every detail tightened the coil in his chest. Finally, Eldrick spoke the words no one else dared. "We cast out our shield." Silence fell heavy. Kalim's breath hitched for only a fraction of a second, but it was enough. He turned toward the western horizon where Ashfall swallowed the sun. "Prepare for a journey," he said quietly. "I am bringing her home." Far beyond their sight, Seraphina stood at the cave's mouth, wind tangling her hair, eyes fixed on the darkening mountains. She did not know Kalim was coming, but she felt the seal weakening again, and this time it would not wait for permission to break. Kalim crossed into Ashfall borderlands at dawn with Brannick and 4 of his strongest wolves. The land felt wrong beneath his paws. Too quiet, too hollow. Even the wind seemed reluctant to move. He kept his jaw tight, refusing to let doubt slow him. Every mile carried the weight of his decision the night he exiled Seraphina. He had believed he was protecting unity. Instead, he may have fractured the very force keeping them alive. Brannick ran at his side, silent but steady. None of them spoke her name, yet it hung between them like a fragile thread. When they reached the ridge overlooking Frostmere Valley from afar, Kalim felt it immediately. A pulse in the air, faint but powerful. Not magic in the childish sense, something older, rooted in mountain and bone. Then he smelled her. Faint. Recent. Relief struck his chest so sharply it almost hurt. Seraphina sensed them before she saw them. 6 heartbeats. One she knew too well. She stood at the mouth of the cave as they approached, the wind whipping her cloak against her legs. When Kalim stepped into view, she did not smile. She did not retreat. She simply watched him, eyes steady and unreadable. The crescent scar on her palm glowed faintly in response to his nearness. Brannick shifted back into human form first. "We were wrong," he said plainly. No speeches. No pride. Kalim followed slowly, shifting with controlled precision. His gaze locked on hers, and for a moment, neither spoke. The silence was not hostile. It was heavy with what could have been lost. "The pack is alive because of you," he said finally, voice rougher than she remembered. The words did not feel like victory. They felt like truth arriving too late. She studied his face carefully. He looked older than when she left. Responsibility had carved deeper lines around his eyes. "You came because you felt it," she said, softly. "It was not a question." Caleb nodded once. "Something beneath Ashfall is pushing through Torvek. It is testing our borders." Seraphina's gaze flicked toward the cave behind her. "It's not just testing the border," she replied. "It's testing me." She stepped aside, gesturing for them to follow. Inside, the symbols glowed brighter at their presence. Brannock's breath caught. One of the younger wolves stepped back instinctively. Caleb did not move. He watched the carvings with sharp focus. "What is this?" he asked. Seraphina met his eyes. "A seal. Bound generations ago. My bloodline strengthens it." She paused. "When I am centered within Black Hollow territory, it holds strongest." Understanding dawned slowly across Caleb's expression. "And when we cast you out—" "It fractured," she finished quietly. There was no accusation in her tone, only fact. Brannock ran a hand through his hair, shaken. "Then we bring you back. Immediately." Seraphina shook her head once. "Not yet." That word struck harder than any accusation could have. Caleb's shoulders stiffened. "Why?" She stepped deeper into the cave, pressing her palm to the crescent carving. The symbols flared, revealing a vision projected in shimmering air. Torvek kneeling before the shadow creature formed of smoke and ember eyes. The wolves behind Caleb recoiled. Even he felt his breath shorten. "It grows stronger every time fear divides us," Seraphina said quietly. "If I return without control, it will push harder. It wants confrontation, chaos. It feeds on it." The cave trembled suddenly, dust raining from the ceiling. A deep vibration rolled through stone like distant thunder. The image shifted, cracks spreading across the invisible barrier surrounding Ravenspire Ridge. Caleb felt it in his bones. The creature was no longer content with testing. It was preparing to break free. "Then what do we do?" Brannock demanded. Seraphina turned. Slowly, eyes steady despite the tremor in the air. "We don't just restore the shield," she said. "We finish what my ancestors started." The vibration intensified, echoing through Ashfall like a warning drum. Far below the mountains, something ancient stirred fully awake. And for the first time, it knew Caleb Thornridge had stepped into its territory. The mountains split with a sound like the world tearing open. Stone cracked down the center of Ashfall Ridge, dust exploding into the sky in a choking gray cloud. Caleb staggered as the ground lurched beneath his feet. Brannock shouted for the others to fall back, but Seraphina did not move. She felt it rising, an ancient pressure pushing upward from beneath the seal her bloodline had guarded for generations. The crescent mark on her palm flared white-hot, brighter than ever before. The cave walls pulsed in rhythm with the tremors. "It's breaking through," one of the wolves gasped. Seraphina stepped forward instead of retreating. The air thickened with the scent of sulfur and something darker, rot and ash. From the widening crack in the mountain, smoke poured upward, twisting into the shape she had seen in her vision. Ember-red eyes opened within the storm of shadow. Torvek Rune stumbled from behind the smoke, collapsing onto one knee as if released from invisible chains. His expression was dazed, horrified. He was no longer guided. He was discarded. The shadow rose higher, forming the outline of a massive wolf made of darkness and flame. It did not have solid flesh. It had hunger. The vibration in the air deepened into a growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Caleb shifted instantly, fur bristling, stepping in front of Seraphina without thinking. She placed a steady hand against his shoulder. "Claws won't stop this," she said firmly. "It wants fear. It wants division." The shadow's ember eyes flicked toward them. The temperature dropped sharply, frost racing across stone, despite the smoke. Seraphina stepped forward alone, heart hammering but steady. "You were meant to stay buried," she said quietly. The creature lunged, not physically, but mentally. A wave of despair crashed through her, flooding her thoughts with every insult, every whisper, every moment she had stood alone while her pack turned away. Exile, shadow, curse. The weight of it nearly drove her to her knees. Behind her, Calum snarled at nothing, feeling the pressure but unable to fight it. Brannock clutched his head as if noise screamed inside it. The shadow fed on that doubt, swelling larger. Seraphina's breath came in ragged pulls. This was its true power, not claws, not fire. It magnified fear until loyalty shattered. She remembered the night of exile, the stones, the humiliation. She could let that pain take root, let it confirm she was unwanted. The barrier would crack instantly. The creature would surge free completely. Instead, she did the hardest thing she had ever done. She forgave them. The shift was immediate. The crescent mark burned brighter, not with anger, but with fierce clarity. She pictured Black Hollow wolves as children, laughing in Frostmere Valley. She pictured Malus braiding wildflowers, Brannock standing loyal despite doubt. Calum's face the moment he realized his mistake. She did not focus on betrayal. She focused on belonging. The shield flared outward in blinding silver light, expanding from her chest like a second sun. The shadow recoiled violently, smoke tearing away in strips. Its ember eyes flared with fury, but the more it pressed despair into her mind, the steadier she became. "You feed on broken bonds," she whispered, voice growing stronger. "But we are not broken." Calum stepped beside her now, not shielding, standing with her. Brannock followed. Even Torvek, trembling, rose slowly behind them. The mountain roared again, but this time the crack began sealing instead of widening. Silver light poured into the fracture like molten metal. The shadow howled, a sound of rage and starvation. Its form twisted, shrinking as the seal strengthened around it. Seraphina stepped closer to the edge of the fissure, raising her glowing palm. "You were bound because you destroy what you touch," she said steadily, "and we choose not to be destroyed." With a final surge of focused will, she drove the light downward. The crescent symbol carved itself anew into the stone, deeper and brighter than before. The shadow collapsed inward, pulled beneath the mountain as the crack sealed completely. Silence crashed down over Ashfall. Dust settled. Smoke faded. Only still air remained. Seraphina swayed on her feet, exhausted beyond measure, but the tremors were gone. The hunger beneath the mountain was quiet, and for the first time in generations, the seal was whole. The silence after the mountain sealed felt unreal, like the world holding its breath to see if it would break again. Seraphina stood at the edge of the cooled fracture, her knees trembling, vision blurred at the edges. The crescent mark on her palm dimmed from blinding silver to a soft glow, then to a faint scar once more. Calum caught her before she could fall. His hands were steady, but his eyes were not. "It's over," he said, almost as if convincing himself. Brannock stepped closer, scanning the horizon, waiting for smoke to rise again. None came. Torvek Rune remained on his knees several paces away, staring at the sealed stone with hollow disbelief. Without the shadow's influence, he looked smaller. Human. Ashfall wolves began emerging cautiously from the tree line, confusion replacing aggression in their eyes. The tension that had gripped the land for months began dissolving like frost under sunlight. But Seraphina did not feel triumph. She felt emptiness, as if part of her had been poured into the mountain to hold the seal. "It's quiet," she whispered faintly. "Not just around them, inside her." The ancient presence that had amplified her strength was no longer pressing against her thoughts. It had settled into stillness, woven fully into the land again. Calum studied her face carefully. "What did it cost you?" he asked softly. She met his gaze, and for a moment the vulnerability she had buried since exile flickered through. "Control," she replied. "I don't have to fight it anymore. It's part of me now." The words were simple, but their meaning ran deep. She was no longer just the shield. She was the lock and the key, The seal would not weaken with distance again. It was anchored permanently through her acceptance. Torvik finally rose to his feet, unsteady but clear-eyed. He approached slowly, hands open, no challenge in his posture. "I don't remember choosing to attack," he admitted, voice rough with shame. Calem's jaw tightened, but he did not snarl. The war between packs had nearly erupted because of manipulation neither of them saw clearly. Seraphina stepped forward before tension could rise. "It fed on fear," she said quietly. "Yours. Ours. That's how it moved you." Torvik nodded once, understanding settling heavily on his shoulders. "Then we were both used." The admission felt like a shift in history. Black Hollow and Ashfall had been rivals for decades. Distrust ran deep. But standing before the sealed mountain, both alphas understood something had nearly destroyed them all. Brannick exhaled slowly. "So what now?" he asked. Calem looked toward Ravenspire Ridge in the distance. Smoke rose gently from cooking fires, not battle. "Now we choose differently," he said firmly. He turned to Seraphina, no command in his voice this time, only respect. "Will you come home?" The question hung between them, not as a demand, but as an invitation. Months ago, exile had forced her out beneath torchlight and accusation. Now the air felt clear, steady. She searched her own chest carefully. There was no bitterness left. The forgiveness she had chosen in the cave still burned warm. "I will," she said at last, "but not as the wolf you cast out." Calem inclined his head slightly. "As what, then?" A faint, tired smile touched her lips. "As the reason we stand here alive." The journey back to Black Hollow was slower, quieter. Wolves from both packs walked side by side across Ashfall's cooling stone. No one spoke loudly. There was too much to process. When Ravenspire Ridge came into full view, a low murmur of awe rippled through Black Hollow wolves waiting at the border. They had felt the tremors. They had seen the silver flare in the sky, and now they saw Seraphina walking at the center, not alone, not exiled. Children ran forward first, breaking formation, eyes wide with relief. Malus reached her and wrapped her arms around her tightly, tears streaking her cheeks. Seraphina held her gently, breathing in the familiar scent of pine and home. Calem stepped forward before the full pack, his voice carrying across the valley. "We survived because of her," he said clearly, "and we will never forget it again." The words echoed against stone, and this time no one looked away. Night fell softly over Ravenspire Ridge, but it no longer carried dread. The air felt clean, steady, like a storm had finally passed. Wolves gathered in the central clearing beneath a full, unbroken moon. No torches of accusation, no circle of judgment, only quiet anticipation. Seraphina stood near the great pine at the heart of their territory, boots pressed into familiar earth. For the first time in months, she felt the land respond to her without resistance. Not because she was forcing it, because she belonged to it fully now. The crescent mark on her palm shimmered faintly under moonlight, not as a warning, but as a promise. Calem approached slowly, not as Alpha commanding exile, but as a leader correcting his failure. "Black Hollow stands because you stood alone," he said, voice steady but humbled. "You carried what we did not understand." The pack listened in silence, the weight of truth settling like fresh snow. Seraphina scanned the faces around her. Wolves who had doubted, whispered, thrown stones. She did not see enemies anymore. She saw fear that had once clouded their judgment. "I was never meant to carry it alone," she said clearly. "The seal holds strongest when we stand together, not when one wolf is pushed out to ease uncertainty." Her voice did not accuse. It instructed. Eldrick Moore stepped forward, leaning on his carved staff, pride softening his weathered features. "Your mother once told me the bloodline would awaken when needed most," he admitted quietly. Murmurs rippled. Few had known that truth. Seraphina felt a pang at the mention of her mother, but it was not sharp anymore. It was steady. Then let it awaken in all of us, she replied. Not as power, as unity. The word echoed stronger than any howl. Calum removed the alpha torque from his neck, a band carved from blackened oak and silver, and held it in both hands. Gasps rose softly from the pack. Leadership is not dominance, he said, gaze fixed on Seraphina. It is responsibility. He did not offer her the torque. He knelt instead, pressing it back around his own neck with deliberate humility. And I failed that responsibility when I let fear decide for me. The act carried more weight than any ceremony. Wolves shifted, some bowing their heads in acknowledgement. Brannock stepped beside him. Then we lead differently, he added firmly. Seraphina felt something warm settle through the clearing. Trust rebuilding in real time. She did not want authority. She wanted balance. We face threats together, she said. No more silence. No more isolation. Heads nodded. Even Torvek, standing respectfully at the border with his wolves, dipped his chin in agreement. The following weeks reshaped more than borders. Black Hollow. Black. And Ashfall began patrolling jointly along shared ridges, turning rivalry into alliance. The mountain remained still, sealed beneath Seraphina's steady presence, but the power no longer drained her. It flowed naturally, like breath. Children played freely again in Frostmere Valley. Malus resumed braiding flowers. Brannock trained young scouts with sharper awareness, and Calum listened more than he commanded. One evening, as the sun dipped gold across snow, he found Seraphina standing at the western cliff where exile had once begun. You could have left, he said quietly. She glanced at him, wind lifting strands of her hair. I almost did, she admitted, but leaving would have proven the shadow right. He nodded slowly. And staying proved us wrong. A faint smile touched her lips. No, she corrected gently. Staying proved we could change. On the anniversary of the sealed mountain, the pack gathered again under the full moon, not in fear, but in remembrance. Seraphina stood at the center, not elevated, not isolated, simply present. The crescent scar on her palm glowed once, faint and peaceful, as if acknowledging the choice she had made. She thought back to the night stone struck her shoulders, to the humiliation that nearly hardened her heart. If she had let bitterness rule, the mountain would have split forever. The pack would have fallen. Instead, she chose forgiveness, and in doing so, became the reason they survived. As wolves lifted their voices in a unified howl that rolled strong and clear across Ravenspire Ridge, Seraphina felt the mountain answer not with tremors, but with calm. The shadow beneath Ashfall was quiet, the seal was whole, and Black Hollow was no longer divided. If this story moved you even a little, take a second right now and tell me in the comments. Have you ever been misunderstood or pushed away for something that later became your greatest strength? And don't forget to share your country and the time you're watching from. I genuinely enjoy seeing how far these stories travel around the world. If you believe that being different does not make you weak, it makes you powerful, press the like button so more people can discover this story. Subscribe for more emotional, cinematic stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Until the next full moon.